everyone, and welcome. This is episode 302 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. I am James, joined by Ryan and Paul. We're doing this on a Sunday morning, so we can get done in time to watch the Packers and hopefully watch the Brewers expand their NL Central lead over the Cubs, or maybe the Reds after today. We'll see. But guys, how's your weekend been, Paul?
I'm real tired. We had all these neighborhood fests, but I'm mostly tired because I went to see Guster last night at the Salt Shed. And I live in the western suburbs of Chicago, and it was in the city of Chicago. And driving from any Chicago suburb to the city takes an hour. And it doesn't matter which one to wear. And so it was a great show, fantastic. Nico Case open, but the best part of it was this. So I was paying attention to the baseball games as they were going on, just on my phone. And when we left the Salt Shed, the Cubs were just starting the 10th inning of their game, and a friend was driving us home. So I didn't really check my phone in the car, and we talked and played more Guster songs. And they live a little bit closer to the city than we do. We left our car at their house. So, we do the transition there. We get in our car, we get all the way home. It takes, an hour and 15 minutes for many reasons. It was busy in the city. And my mom was watching the kids, and since her car was here, we left it on the street. You got to move it in, just like you do like in Milwaukee and Tosa before 2:00. So I go to move her car in, I turn it on, and Pat Hughes is still talking and doing the game. and it's the 13th or 14th or whatever. And I was like, how is this game possibly still going on? It should have been over an hour and a half ago. So I got to hear them lose live spontaneously, which was super fun. It made me happy.
Yeah, so I turned it on and watched it on MLB TV when I got home from the musical Run Bambi Run at the Rep downtown, which was I'll just say it had camp value. there was all kinds of camp value to the thing. As Steve Garshinsky said to me in group text, he said it combines the two worst things on earth, which is musical theater and true crime. So it
fair.
There was stuff in there that I just wow. It definitely left an impression. So yeah, I got home and then watched the end of the Brewers game because I was in the musical. I go in and they're up 5-1, and I come in for intermission and they have just won the game. So the game has literally just ended at that point. And I went, what the hell happened?
Yeah, roller coaster of emotion on Saturday night for sure.
Yeah, it really, really must have been. I mean, holy crap, what a thing. So, but everybody was like, oh, it's the game of the year. And then I went back and rewatched, and it was a good reminder of, I think, Brian Anderson is getting to the end of his tenure with the Brewers and all of that, but listening to him call the Canna Grand Slam was a good reminder of why he's so good and why it was, we've been lucky to have him for as long as we have, even though he's not as plugged in as he used to be because he's just not there calling most of the games anymore. It's,
right.
He's just doing 50 games this year. So it's different than it used to be, but still in that moment, the absolute crazy drama of it. And I still haven't heard the euchre call of it. I don't know if you guys have heard that. But I would look for.
No, I have not.
Well, I heard the euchre call of Contreras' home run the night before, which was just an absolute monster blast. So I've heard that one, but I still haven't heard the euchre call of this because it was in the 8th inning, right? So euchre was on the mic, presumably.
Yeah, I have not checked it as of Sunday morning. I frankly woke up and we started doing this.
Yeah.
So we'll see how well I stumble through this, but plenty to talk about for the Brewers for sure. An exciting weekend on multiple fronts. Lots of questions, and a reminder that you can become a patron and get question priority at patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month gets you that perk both here and on reporting as eligible, the Packers podcast with Paul. $5 gets you that question priority plus additional exclusive content. That includes the Minor League Extra with Ryan and James Anderson of RotoWire every month and Paul's Packers mini pods. Even if you're not a patron, you can support us another way. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you're listening to us right now. Give us a 5-star review. And while you're there, hit that subscribe or follow button to make sure you don't miss an episode. All right. So, as I mentioned, a good weekend for the Brewers, not so good weekend for the Cubs. The Brewers' magic number to win another NL Central title is down to single digits. Mark Canha with that storybook grand slam that Ryan mentioned on Saturday night. The Cubs then lost to the D-backs again in that marathon. So the magic number for the Brewers stands at 8 heading into Sunday. Division lead is now all the way up to 6.5 games ahead of the Cubs. And the Cubs are actually now only a half game up on the Reds for second place and only a game up on Miami, who's outside of the playoff picture. So things going bad at a bad time for the Cubs. But on the Brewers end, Paul, are we allowed to feel really confident about winning the division at this point?
Yes, we are. There are only, I think, 14 games left, and we got a 6.5 game lead, and that is a very, very comfortable lead. You would need to have something historic go wrong, and historic things don't happen very much. I know it feels like they do far too often, but they really don't. So, yeah, this is about as good of a lead as you're going to have in this situation. The other thing you want to make sure of, you want to keep in mind, you want to have a 4-game lead going into the last series. That's all. And to specify, over the Cubs, since the Reds are still nominally hanging around there. You never know. But, yeah, they're in great shape. The Cubs have totally tanked. They've been absolutely horrible for about a week and a half now since their first Arizona series. And, yeah, it's very, very good. This is good. We're in a good spot. Couldn't be better.
Yep, 100% down the line. They're already kind of lining up their rotation for the playoffs at this point on the assumption that they're going to be hosting that 3-game series on October 3rd, 4th, 5th. So they're setting it up so that it'll be Burns, Woodruff, and Peralta for those 3 games, which makes a lot of sense to me. You could quibble about the order there, but especially in a 3-game series, I don't know that it matters that much. Particularly how you're going to line them up. So, yeah, they're proceeding like that. They're definitely being super cautious. The Christian Yelich coming back on Friday and then being back out of the lineup on Saturday tells me that they're just like, no, we need him healthy and we need to get him right for the playoffs. So they are definitely being cautious in this whole thing, and they're treating it like they've pretty much got it, and they just need to finish out without a disaster, basically. Like it would take an utter collapse. They could probably, go 2-12, and there's still a pretty decent chance they'd make the playoffs at that point. I think
the Cubs have their next 6 are against trash. They do play Pittsburgh and Colorado, but they just lost 2 of 3 from Colorado. It's not like the other thing is, like, even if the Brewers get a little cold, there's no sign that the Cubs are going to go on a tear and just rip through everybody game after game. And there's a stopper there too. They're going to run into Atlanta, and Atlanta is going to be all set, but Atlanta's just so good that they're going to be difficult no matter what. So it's a tough road to hoe for the Cubs to come back here. It's really looking good for the Brewers. It would have to be really weird.
Yeah, and you do wonder how they're going to set up. Like, I would think Atlanta's pitching would probably go in that. Well, no, because they're going to have the bye, so they aren't going to be playing until like the following weekend. So they actually probably do in the last series pitch their best guys, and probably don't pitch their best guys in that Cubs series. But yeah, at this point, it looks like they have a decent chance of getting passed by the Reds. So I don't even know how much we're necessarily even focused on the Cubs anymore, except that they happen to be the one that's a game up.
Well, they're good. The Cubs are still nominally good, and the Reds aren't. So that's a good reason.
There is that. Yeah, they are the better of the 2 teams, even if record-wise, them and the Reds are essentially the same. So the magic number for the playoffs then is 7, right? The way that should work.
I believe it's 8 per JR's jersey countdown at the moment.
Oh, okay.
But that might be for the division.
That's the division. That's the division. I was talking about, the playoffs, which is almost indistinguishable because the Cubs have now fallen basically to the edge of that very, very confused wild card race. There are what? 5 teams fighting it out for 3 wild card spots.
We probably shouldn't totally discount the Reds. Just looking at their schedule, they have the Twins, Pirates, Guardians, and Cardinals to finish. And, they probably still won't. They'll probably be a 500 team against that lineup. But if they're going to go on a tear against a bunch of teams, that's a good bunch of teams to go on a tear against.
Yeah, it's also bad news for the Cubs too, because the Cubs do not have the tiebreaker with the Reds. The Reds
Ah,
have that tiebreaker, and the Cubs also, because they can't beat the Diamondbacks, don't have a tiebreaker with Arizona,
Right.
which could end up really hurting them in that mess for the wild card. If you look at it right now, they're still in that fifth spot, but they're only a half game up, I believe, on uh, the teams in
right.
that sixth spot, and only a full game up on Miami, who's a half game out. So tiebreakers also could be an issue for the Cubs coming down the stretch here. They really put themselves in a really tough position.
Yeah, I mean, they had been on an unsustainably hot run for a long time, and it was pointed out this week that like that series loss to the D-backs was their first. So that was last weekend, or last weekend.
Yeah.
That series loss was their first in over a month. So like,
Yep.
yeah, they've been on an insanely hot run, and those just don't last forever. Oh no, yeah, it's actually 6 teams are fighting for the
Bottom
that
two
last
spots.
yeah, because it's weird how MLB does this, but they have Cincinnati and Arizona both currently on that last spot, but only one of them can get it. And then
Right.
Miami and San Francisco, San Francisco 75 and 74, and so they're only 2.5 back. I guess they're kind of falling out of it now. They were doing well, but they've lost 3 in a row, and the other ones down at the bottom have won a bunch in a row. So San Francisco is kind of falling out of it, I guess, at this point. But they could still rebound and get back in. I mean, it's just going to take a hot 2 weeks from them.
Yeah, a lot of teams to pass though. All right, we'll talk more about the playoff picture. Some more questions about that, about who we want the Brewers to face again. Our weekly update on that. But first, a couple of things I wanted to get to before we get to Patreon questions this week. Of course, there were some notable business wheelings and dealings from the Brewers in the last week. Allegedly some sort of stadium renovation deal may be close to being done. We'll talk about that more next week, though, because the official announcement is supposed to come in the next week. So we'll get a better idea of the numbers there. So we won't touch on it this week, but that story broke on Friday. And then there was also the quote major announcement on Friday that the Brewers were super cagey about, and it ended up being a sponsorship patch on their uniforms. So they're the 15th team in the majors to put an ad on their jerseys. Kind of odd that it took them almost all season to fill that space, even though they seemingly kind of kept that sleeve open with no patches all year, just in case something came together. So, Paul, you really wanted to talk about sponsorship patches. So,
I mean, why get paid a little money when you can why get paid a lot of money when you can get paid a little bit of money for just the end of the season?
Sure.
I just wanted to talk about how tone deaf it is to have a press conference to announce a patch on a uniform, and how they have this weird problem like with the X golf and with like random minor things, and trying to justify the stadium deal with their coolers not working properly, like, which is like $1,000 to fix, not 600 million. Like, they're just weird. And this is another weird one because they made a big deal of it. Like, they sent the ominous press release around new press release Brewers 11 o'clock. Like, what are you doing? Like, people love Northwestern Mutual, right? That's a thing people get excited about. Normal people in everyday life. That's like, why did you do that? Like, stop doing that. Don't call ominous press conferences when you have people who might be hurt, when you have a stadium deal being negotiated to announce a patch. Stop that. Hire better people to run your marketing, for God's sake.
So I wonder, now that we know, because that was Friday morning, and then Friday afternoon, we had this Friday news dump of the potential stadium deal that hit from, you were saying it was CBS 58, right, James? Were the ones that broke it? AJ, yep. And who is the other person?
It was either AJ or Emily Fannin, both
Emily,
at 58 now. Yeah.
Okay, so those two had this story about that. So I wonder how much of it was like some sort of subterfuge. They were trying to like throw people off the scent that like this other much more important thing was going on. But like the rumors that were going around on Friday morning were all like, well, this isn't going to be about the stadium deal, right? Like we saw that right away. It's like, this isn't likely to be about the stadium deal. So we went, okay. So everybody assumed it was some sort of announcement about the beer district. That was the hot rumor, at least when I was looking at it in the morning. And then I looked at it at lunch and was like, oh, it was a patch from Northwestern Mutual. Their presence in the stadium had gone down quite a bit in recent years. Like they used to have like signage kind of everywhere and all of that, and then it basically was just limited. They have that all you can eat club up in left field. It used to be some extra luxury boxes, and then they tore those out, and it's over kind of up by the X Golf 300 Club, that area, but a little bit further down from that. But that was like the only thing they kind of had in the stadium, and I always thought it was kind of weird because I always paid attention to it, and I was curious as to what was going on. And then immediately last night during the game, you saw behind home plate, like Northwestern Mutual now has significant real estate in that stadium in terms of sponsorship. So this clearly wasn't just the patch. Like they were clearly also doing all this other stuff. But yeah, super weird to do the press conference for it. And also just the way that these things, like if you actually looked at what they said, it was so cringy and so just corporate speak that you can't help but just be like, who is this actually for? Who are you convincing to buy a life insurance policy with like a cringy press conference where it's like, oh, these two stalwarts of the community are now partners again and da 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 da. Like, so I don't know why you would do that. It's just
corporate brain rot. Like,
yeah, it is.
You spend enough time in a C-suite and these things start to sound reasonable to you, and that is not the case. They are not reasonable to normal people. Nobody cares.
Yeah, it's strange, but also like whatever. It really doesn't affect anything now that this is done. It's like, okay, so now there's a patch on the uniform. I mean, are people actually upset about that? I saw people mockingly be upset about it.
I've heard no real complaints. I don't think that anybody cares. No, even olds, I don't think.
There's probably a small enough thing you barely notice it. Yeah.
There's probably two guys who call into the one remaining sports radio station in Milwaukee and complain about it, and that's probably as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like putting it on the front of the jersey the way that like European soccer clubs have for forever. Like they actually put the title sponsor right on the front of the jersey in the place where we would put Brewers or Milwaukee. They just have like, you know, the Liverpool has Standard Chartered, the bank, like as their title sponsor and have forever. I mean, that is much more intrusive and much because anybody who buys a jersey is walking around wearing that. Like this, who knows if they're even going to put those on the official jersey. Well, they probably will, right? If you buy an official authentic jersey, it'll probably have the patch if you're buying it from the team store. But like if you're buying a knockoff, I don't know that it's even going to be on there. So like, who cares?
It will after I start my business making knockoff Northwestern Mutual patches.
The font is just slightly off. Yeah, exactly.
Step 4, profit.
No, you see, the reason you'll be able to tell mine are forgeries is that they'll be higher quality than the ones Fanatics makes.
Oh, God. Yeah, did you see? Who was that this week where they were showing the picture of all of the stuff being out of alignment on their official jersey?
Yeah, it was, I think, like the Eagles Kelly Green jersey I saw.
It was a Jalen Hurts jersey that somebody got where the number was just completely like sideways. It was amazing.
Just what are we doing here?
I don't know. All right. Well, this brings us to our first Patreon question of the week. Mountain Doom 98 asking, how competitive was the MKE Tailgate podcast bid for the uniform patch, Ryan?
Extremely competitive. We were right in there until the end. And then, had to drop out and bow to Northwestern Mutual's superior resources on this case. Yeah. And also all of our money goes to the Tom Google Foundation instead. So that's that and our charitable stuff every year with, we should probably do that again because it's getting to be playoff time. We need to come up with some sort of gimmick like we did a few years ago for the burning of the baseball to raise money for Hunger Task Force again. So
the real reason we didn't get it, of course, is the conflict of interest since I produced the patches. So, you know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Get a little slice of every penny that comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Be on the supply side, guys. That's the lesson.
One last thing I wanted to touch on before we get to the rest of your guys' questions this week. I guess more than 2 years worth of rumors and possible tampering kind of came to fruition this past week as David Stearns finally was hired by the New York Mets. So this saga is finally over. Ryan, are we happy this is done, or do you have some hard feelings about how it all went down and the possible tampering nature?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely was tampering. I mean, that's not really up for debate because it
Yeah,
was all done so
in
damn
the
publicly.
technical sense, technical sense, it was definitely tampering. Just a matter of how you feel about it, really.
Yeah, because it was very clear that the Mets wanted David Stearns for 2 years and that they had told any journalist who was willing to listen that they were going to get David Stearns. That's who they wanted. And that basically, I think, ended any chance the Brewers ever had of re-upping him to an extension after the 2021 season once the Mets had put that out on the street and then got, David Stearns leaving a year early last fall, which I think was still the right call for him in that situation because he was going to be a lame duck. And it wasn't really right for him to stick around a year when he's so clearly a lame duck and run things when Matt Arnold is right there and Matt Arnold is going to be taking over for him at some point anyway. Getting out of the way in that particular situation was the best thing Stearns could do. But yeah, it's still, and there's really no hard feelings with Stearns. This is his childhood dream job that he wanted. And so no hard feelings towards him. And obviously he's going to get a huge pile of cash for himself. So he's definitely going to get paid more. And he's also going to have Steve Cohen money to spend instead of Mark Attanasio money to spend. And that's going to be significantly more. So no real hard feelings towards him. But Cohen seems to have at least broken quite a few rich guy code points here. And that seems to have engendered some distaste. You get the distinct feeling the Brewers are not happy about how it all went down. But as far as I know, they haven't actually lodged an official tampering complaint. Nothing has been made public about any of that. So I think this just goes down as one of those things that happened. But it certainly was a bitter and acrimonious way for this whole thing to end for a guy who did so much for the franchise. But also, I think just like the cost of doing business and like Steve Cohen was going to get his man apparently no matter what. Come hell or high water, he was willing to wait 2 years to get his guy from the point where the job really became open. And they've clearly been like feathering the nest so that Stearns would fit right in up to the point that, the guy that they hired, Billy Epler, is a close friend of Stearns and is going to maintain the GM job. Stearns is just going to, slot in right above him and now take over actually running baseball operations. So they clearly were willing to wait to do this. It'll be interesting to know how much communication there was between Stearns and Cohen before August 1st, which was when they could officially start talking about this, when his contract opened up for being able to look elsewhere. But we may never know exactly how much back and forth had happened there. But clearly there had to be some because the way that this was reported in by Heyman and by Nightingale was just as a fait accompli for a very long time.
Yeah, the reason I don't care that much is just because I think the mutual interest was so big. It's like with Stearns being so related to the franchise and everybody speculating forever that he would end up there. Like tampering was to some extent probably inevitable just at conferences and at owners meetings and GM meetings. Like it was just going to be discussed, and it probably was inevitable to a large extent. So I don't care. If this was like subterfuge to steal our awesome guy with no relation, then I care a little bit. But I think, he always kind of did want to do it legitimately. So whatever, it's fine.
Yeah, and he got a year off to hang out with his young family. So
yeah,
it worked out fine for him too. And yes, that was a year off. I don't think he had much of anything to do with any decision making from the day he stepped down. I think he was pretty much out. I would be surprised if he even still had internal access at that point. He was pretty much gone, even though he was still technically on the payroll and still technically an advisor.
For sure. All right, we've got a couple of Patreon questions about this situation, so let's get to those now. Adam Post asking, how long will it take David Stearns to turn the Mets into contenders? What strategies from his Brewers tenure will he feature prominently at the Mets? So I guess, Ryan, let's start with you. Obviously, the Mets were contenders as recently as last year. This year kind of just fell apart, but I guess, how do you see David Stearns adjusting his model to additional resources?
Well, I'd say first off, for the how long is it going to take? I would say next year at the soonest. I would not be even a little bit surprised if the Mets were a playoff team next year, based on, they're going to have to do some stuff this winter, and they're going to have to be creative to get there because the roster does have issues, obviously, at the moment. But they also have some building pieces to work around. I mean, they have guys there that they can build something around. It's just going to be a question of kind of how aggressive he is and how he wants to do that. And I'd say like 3 years on the long side, and that might even be pushing it. Like, I would expect to see them in the playoffs within 3 years, and I'd be shocked if it took much longer than that. And so basically, strategy wise, I think he's going to do like the souped up version of what he did here, just with more money, where it is first build through depth. So you're going to have much, much deeper rosters. Now, that was actually something that the Mets had really started even before Stearns got there. Epler was more focused on that. Remember those Mets teams of the mid to late Wilpon era, where it was like, yes, they have like 5 or 6 very, cromulent big league stars, and then after that, the roster just like is an absolute dumpster fire. They had already been fixing that. So they've already been working to build up depth, but what Stearns is going to do is make sure that there's a good amount of cost controlled depth sort of behind what they're what the stars are. And I wouldn't be surprised like if he kind of adopts the theory of like, okay, we're going to pay for stars at the top of the roster to an extent. That Harold Reynolds nonsense yesterday about him going and getting Mike Trout. No.
Yeah, no.
That
Ohtani maybe, but not Trout. Yeah.
Right, yeah, like Ohtani.
If they could find him.
Right.
Yes. There is that. But I think that really it'll be building through depth and bringing in stars sort of in the myriad of ways that you can do that. Like what was David Stearns' signature day with the Brewers was when, in a couple of hours they signed Lorenzo Cain to the largest free agent deal in franchise history. And then they traded for Christian Yelich. And those two things came sort of together. I would expect him to take every avenue. There will be waiver claims. There will be small trades. There will be big trades. There will be small signings. There will be bigger signings because it's the Mets. I expect him to kind of do everything. And really, like one of the biggest things here is just like, and I'm sure it's already really started with the Mets. And I think they just did the pitching lab thing this year. This was year 1 of their pitching lab. Like they were already getting ready for like Stearns before Stearns even got there. But I would expect them to build out the infrastructure of the organization so that their goal is to become the Dodgers, right? That's what they want to do. They want to build that sort of perpetual motion machine. And I think that, David Stearns is the ideal guy to do that. Like if you can't get Andrew Friedman and he's otherwise occupied, I think David Stearns, because that seems to be what he constructed in Milwaukee. We're now seeing the perpetual motion machine that he kind of put in place starting to really come to fruition with the Brewers having a top, 5-3, depending on who you listen to, farm system at this point. Even though they were winning this whole time, they still have a top farm system. That's an incredibly difficult trick to pull off. And I think that will be David Stearns. That's his number one, like long-term goal here, is to turn the Mets into this Brewers-esque perpetual, or Dodgers-esque, I should say, perpetual motion machine.
Yeah, it'll probably be fine. Probably won't take very long when you have all the resources. I do wonder if there may be some issues taking the Brewer Ray method to a place where you're going to have more stars in the lineup and doing some of the versatility management that you've done in the past. Now, I don't think it matters that much because you can lean on pitching because nobody's going to complain about that, like just ideal pitching usage. But I can see hitting being a little bit more of a problem. But you got resources. You can just buy bats. It'll be fine. It would also help, I think, if he got counsel, and we'll see if that happens. But I kind of don't think he will, at least right away. So, but I think having to manage I think the manager thing is helpful. I mean, we know he's really good at implementation of the front office stuff, and I do think you do suffer if you don't have a good implementer of the front office stuff on the field. So finding that guy is also pretty crucial. I think he's a big difference maker, and if you don't, I think some of the things that you do at the high analytics level might blow up in your face a little bit.
I'm very interested to hear more about that in a minute, about where you think CC is going, but we have a question about it, so I'm going to wait.
Yeah, we can wait for that.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that, Paul.
Well, it's not that interesting an answer, but we can save it for the actual
One last thing before we get to that question, too, about just kind of Stern's style. I am kind of interested to see how he manages the constant rumor mill out of like New York, because stuff gets out early frequently, and that was sort of a hallmark of the Stearns era too. Like, you heard no peeps about any prospective moves until they happened with the Brewers, and it seems like he kind of runs a tight ship in that regard, and that's not going to happen when you've got like the New York Post and Daily News floating stuff every single day, right? So,
not to mention like the Bergen County Register and like all of the things that, you know, float around out there, because it's still like, how many different newspapers send beat reporters to the Mets and Yankees games? It's still like 20.
It's still a ton.
Yeah, it's still a bunch from all over the place. Maybe more for the Yankees than for the Mets, but yeah, that you're right. I hadn't thought of that. That is going to be interesting to watch, because he did have a very, very tight ship here, and it's hard to imagine him being able to muster that in New York. He's going to have to get better at playing that game. Particularly in Milwaukee, there just wasn't a lot of pressure on him to be like, you know, he was never the most like forward facing, public facing of executives. And I don't think that was something like, I don't think he's uncomfortable with it, but I don't think it was what he really liked to do. There are people that like to be in that spotlight, and he's not one of them. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles the New York thing, because that's going to be part of this. He is the rock star GM coming in to save the Mets, and there's immediately going to be a lot of, you know, public facing pressure on that. So that is interesting.
All right, let's get to that Craig Counsell question. It comes from Corey Diedrich, who's asking, do you think Craig Counsell will take a year off after this, or do you think he ends up managing somewhere else? Sub question: will Brian Anderson end up on a milk carton or an episode of Unsolved Mysteries first? So, Paul, your thoughts on Craig Counsell?
I think the Mets would do well to get him, but I do think he'll take a year off. I think he is sick of managing this team, but I suspect he's just sick of managing. Managing's hard. His managing in particular is hard. It's very active. It is a lot of work. And, you know, Craig Counsell has had a lot of baseball jobs. He's been a front office guy. He's been a player. And I will tell you almost certainly that certain areas of the front office, not all of them, but certain areas, work less hard than the manager does. So I suspect he will end up back in baseball at some point. I would guess in a front office role, not a manager role. But I'm guessing he's taking a year off, because that guy looks burned. Like, he looks like he needs a rest and is not having any fun. So I don't think he will be like the manager of the Mets next year. I do not think that'll happen. I think he's going to be out for at least a year. And when he comes back, I don't know if he's going to be in that role again, because it doesn't seem to make him very happy.
Well, I mean, it definitely stresses him out. You see it on his face before, during, after games.
That guy needs a vacation. Like,
yeah,
he really does.
Yeah, like especially by this time of year. I suspect most managers who are in a contending position are really stressed out this time of year, because, you know, it's a stressful job and it takes a lot out of you. But he seems to wear it harder, or at least he wears it more visibly on his face. I mean, you've all seen the memes. I mean, he really it seems to wear on him, and those post-game press conferences sometimes look like even when they've won, look like a man who is just broken and beaten down. So yeah, I guess I do think he's going to stay a manager. I think that's like his skill set. He's so good at it.
He's good at it. I'm just not sure he likes it, so I'm not sure that matters.
There is that. Yeah, it's hard to know exactly. Like, he wears his stress on his face in a way some people do and some people don't. So I don't know. And especially like if he were to go into like being part of a brain trust in an organization, that isn't necessarily the most stressful job. unless you're like running, and I don't think you would be like running the scouting department or something. Well, yeah, then your stressful time is the spring leading up to the draft. Like that is your stressful time, and then it eases off, and so it cycles differently, but it's still stressful for a lot of those like third in charge people or whatever at an organization. Paul, you're right. Like they're not as stressed out because they don't have as much individual responsibility the way a manager has for the team on the field, or the general manager / president of baseball ops has for the organization as a whole. Those guys have like the weight of that big responsibility. When you're second fiddle in there, yeah, I imagine it's less stressful, and you can just sort of concentrate on like doing your particular role to your best ability, and that but that one's, yeah, I would. He is so good at it, though. That's the problem. And do you think he does finally win his Manager of the Year award this year? I do. I think it is trending that way. I don't see a strong next candidate for it because the Braves and Dodgers were expected to be good and are good. I guess I could see there being some like, oh, the Dodgers were expected to fall off a little bit this year, and yet here they are still again 100-win team. So maybe you get some Dave Roberts love in there, and I don't know if
some Torey Lovulo too in Arizona.
Maybe that could be, though they're very fringy. I think if the narrative that should win out here is look at what Craig Counsell dealt with from a roster perspective this year, and look at where they're at, and just like obviously that award belongs to him. Like that's what should happen, but who knows if people are actually paying that close of attention. To take the sub question real quick here, Brian Anderson is clearly in the Springfield mystery spot, falling through space and time for all eternity. And
it gives good defensive players. That's what it does.
Yeah, it does. Yes. So that is clearly where Brian Anderson is.
Couple more Craig Counsell, David Stearns questions. Luke Roy Suitcase asking, reflecting on Stearns' tenure in Milwaukee, how should we think about credit for success of the team over the past 7 years? Who deserves the most credit? Rank from most to least. Ownership, David Stearns, Matt Arnold, Doug Melvin, Craig Counsell, players, or fans. So lots of options, but Paul, I guess where would he rank in terms of reasons for success over the past decade-ish?
Stearns pretty high. Organizational discipline, generally good. Like building the pitching lab. Like number one, I think. I have a hard time not giving credits to players, but this is one of the areas where I do think the organization deserves a whole lot of credit. If Yelich would have come in here and been MVP level the whole time, that would be a different story. I think you could give a lot to him. You can go for any of the individual pitchers, but the way the Brewers do things is pretty unique, and it has managed to keep them competitive for the longest stretch in the history of the franchise. So Stearns is, I think, one with a bullet here. And after that, you're just picking random people who, based on whatever criteria you want.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, and you're right about the players thing. Like, they kind of have to be number one, but then again, like, it's Stearns' job to get them and to figure out ways to help them improve. Like, is ultimately his responsibility to put the infrastructure in place, like you said, with the pitching lab and with the coaching staffs and whatever. That's his responsibility. Notably, David Stearns did not hire Craig Counsell. So that was done before he got here. And
Indeed.
There was some drama around that at the time. Like, oh, David Stearns is being saddled with Mark Attanasio's pick. And Keith Law was not a fan of that, though he's come around on Counsell a lot in the last 5-6 years, when it's been pretty undeniable that Craig Counsell's a great manager. But yeah, people did not necessarily get on board with the idea, because there is a feeling that general managers, presidents of baseball operations, should be able to pick their managers. And this was just a weird situation where, like, Craig Counsell was in-house, and obviously the talent was recognized. I think probably Doug Melvin told Mark Attanasio, hey, you've really got something here, and we probably should, act to keep Craig Counsell in-house because whatever. And that gets to the other point. Like, obviously Stearns, Arnold, Counsell, like that whole crew of people deserves credit, as does Doug Melvin, for he gave David Stearns a much softer landing than I think anybody realized at the moment he was handing
Carlos Gomez trade and all that stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like he did that, but also just like a lot of, like they did the Zach Davies trade. They traded Jordan Parra for Zach Davies. There are a bunch of little trades that sort of set that up, and also just like they had sort of cleared most of the payroll at that point. Like it was, he had a pretty soft landing spot from Doug Melvin. So Doug definitely helped set him up. And actually, more than anything, the pitching development, we didn't know it at the time, but was already on a pretty big upswing at that point. It just, the fruits of that weren't going to become obvious for another 3-4 years, but they had already drafted Brandon Woodruff at that point, and things were, and Devin Williams and some others in there. Nelson was in that group, so they had already sort of given a soft landing on that. But I think you also do have to, and it's totally not fashionable, and there's people screaming at me on the radio right now. When I like, ownership deserves credit for this too, because Mark Atanasio hired David Stearns. And so like from the perspective of, you have to hire good people and put them in place and sort of let them do their thing. That was done here. That was the model that was basically followed, was you hire a good person and you let them build out the organization. And it has worked, a dream. This has been a dream. And so that's their job in ownership, to do that. And that's what happened here. So I think there's credit that is deserved there too. But
I'll give council more credit than ownership. I feel like the organization is great at working within the confines put upon it by ownership, more than ownership giving it all of the necessary resources to be successful. Like they've figured out how to work operationally lean and efficient in this, but like I'm not giving them too much hype for they spend fine, they spend okay, but like it's not a strength of the team, the spending level. It's just that they're good at working within it. That's all.
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. But I mean, and a lot of those restrictions just come from the fact that you are in baseball's smallest market. And so the revenue streams are kind of capped at being in the middle of the pack, middle to like the 15 to 20 range is about what the estimated revenue streams are for the Brewers. They're somewhere in that sort of general area, which we do vastly outperform our market size in terms of revenue. There's no question about that. Like, we're outproducing, but we're dwarfed by all of the big franchises, like in much larger markets.
Sure.
So
I agree with that. That just gets your ownership a C. That's what it gets. If you want an A, you have to spend more than that, and they don't.
Yeah, they, especially in this era, because I went back and looked, and like in 2012, 13, 14, that era, they were up sometimes in like the I think they topped out at 13th for opening day payroll. And so they haven't really done that. Now they kind of sit in that 20 range. They usually are like 19, 20, 21 in that range. So they're not spending up in terms of big league player salaries. And there is an important distinction to make there, because there are other items on the budget that because baseball's books are closed, we don't see. So there's also like those factors that, because like when you invest in something like the pitching lab, well, that does take money to invest in it, for the personnel, for the technology, for whatever, but that doesn't show up in the players' salaries. So until like down the road, like it doesn't show up in terms of expenditure. So there is that. But I mean, I think that like ultimately the most important thing that baseball owners do is they hire people to run their teams. And that's like the single most important thing that any pro sports organization does. And the track record here has been pretty good in terms of hiring, from Council to Stearns. I think Matt Arnold is going to be a pretty big win for them. It's a little early to say that definitively, but if this year's draft is any indication, like Matt Arnold seems to have some serious stuff going for him. And also this year's trade deadline, a lot of good things for Matt Arnold too. So, yeah, we have to wait and see how that plays out. It's a hard act. David Stearns is a hard act for anybody to follow, right?
Yeah,
right.
He is.
All right. Well, speaking of Matt Arnold, I think this is my favorite question of the week. It comes from the Cheese to Wilson Contreras' Wine, one of our new patrons, who lays out the following scenario. Council and Arnold get thrown into a Clark County Thunderdome. Each are force-fed 6 beer bongs from the finest blats that a warm 97 Geo Metro car trunk can offer 30 minutes before the smackdown of the century. They're each given a broken beer bottle, a pocket of sand, and a novelty rubber bat. The fate of Brian Anderson lies in the hands of the winner. Who wins, why, and what happens to Brian Anderson? Paul?
I don't know what Matt Arnold looks like. I have never bothered to find out, and so it makes it hard to find out. So I'll go with Stearns, who looks to be in pretty good shape and is pretty cutthroat to take this. In that case, Brian Anderson is thrown into a pit of despair. So that's my guess.
Oh, but it's Council Arnold.
Oh, Council Arnold. Oh, sorry.
Council Arnold.
Oh, well, Council's a
Same.
professional athlete, so he
Right,
wins.
yeah.
Right. Like going away, he easily wins. Professional athletes, generally speaking, can beat the ever-living stuffings out of non-professional athletes, and that is definitely going to be true here. So yeah, he wins easily.
Yeah, the professional athlete aspect of this definitely, I think, tips it towards Council. Though Arnold seems to be in decent, like I've just seen mostly just headshots of him, but he seems to be in fine shape. He's not, whatever. But the important thing to note here is pocket sand. That's the important thing to note. That's yeah, and 2x4s, like 2x4s of pocket sand. Shisha.
I'm just gonna go with the quote from Fight Club, where skinny guys fight until they're burgers. So I go with Craig Counsell in that one too. So
I mean,
that.
Professional athletes are like Craig Counsell is like a phenomenal athlete. I
Yes.
know he looks
Top
like
1% of the world. Yes,
I know he looks like a 50-year-old, 12-year-old boy, but he is he is not, and this would not be close. Just people need to understand.
Yeah.
Okay, more Mets talk. Bill Robb is asking, what will the Mets offer for Burns? What do you think would be a fair return? So, assuming this exodus continues, Ryan, and the Mets try to go for Corbin Burns, what would you ask for?
I mean, I don't think the Mets are going to go and trade for 1 year of Corbin Burns, especially now that his agent is Scott Boras, unless Stearns has some sort of inside info that like, oh yeah, he's really going to want to stay with me and like sign a long-term extension and whatever. That just seems like a very un-Stearns thing to do, would be to sign a guy with 1 year of control left and an agent that is seemingly signaling the intent to go to free agency. Like when you hire Scott Boras, a year and a half before free agency, that generally signals your intent to go to free agency and not to sign an extension, right? So I kind of feel like they wouldn't make a trade here. That he would if he's going to make a play for Corbin Burns, it's going to be next winter when he's a free agent, not now.
I think that's largely true. My only addition will be baseball needs to. They really do need to add the trading of draft picks so that I can answer these questions by saying, like, I don't know, like a second. But
I mean, yeah, what is the fair return here? That's like the bigger question. I don't know. I know that we're going to get less for Corbin Burns when he gets traded this winter, which I think is not a lock, but I think is pretty likely. The Brewers will get less than what people think, and it especially won't be because people think what you're going to get is like either young major league star level talent, or you're going to get like a huge pile of top end prospects that are highly ranked on a list, and that's just not what you get for 1 year of a guy with an arbitration 3 salary coming. Corbin Burns is probably going to get close to 20 million, between like I'd say like 17 and 20 million this winter. And so the surplus value on top of that 17 to 20 million for 1 year is just not as big as people think. It just, it doesn't work out the way people think it will or should, because remember, in these situations, you aren't trading players, you're trading their contracts. And this is, that's what Corbin Burns is. There is surplus value on top of the, him, whatever he's making for next year. There is surplus value on top of that, but it's just not as big as people think.
Yep.
All right. On the topic of Corbin Burns, James Vandenberg asking, what's everyone's feeling on Burns? He hasn't put together back-to-back good starts since July and has spoiled the run support he does get See, Saturday and earlier in the month versus the Pirates when he gave up 5+ runs twice in August. When he's on, he's really on, but I would 100% take Freddie or Woody to start a must-win game. So, I guess, Paul, kind of going back to the Brewers setting up their playoff rotation, if it's a must-win game, do you still trust Burns or somebody else?
I'd probably go Woodruff first, I suppose. But Burns is he is good when he's on, but when he's off, he can get really problematic really quickly. And you just have to look back to the year before he turned into Corbin Burns and the home run problems. Like when he suffers small losses of control, it does seem to hurt him more than it probably should, just because of the way he attacks people. And yeah, it's been a problem off and on this year. And sometimes he's dialed in, but when he loses it, he's kind of like he's like stretched out Josh Hader. Like it just it can turn into something big over 9 innings instead of big over 1 inning. Like it becomes a problem. So yeah, I trust him. He's good. I'd like to have him on my team, but the other guys have been much more shut down than he has lately. And lately, not even lately, like kind of all season. Freddie, not as much. Freddie's his own problem. That's why I pick Woodruff, because Freddie can go to pot any minute too, but it just hasn't lately. But yeah, he's good. He's like I think it makes him hard to value because he is like an elite pitcher if you can keep him focused and keep him injury free. And but if not, he goes downhill pretty quickly to average E to good. So that's a tricky one for me.
Yeah, but I think you can say the same thing for Freddie there. So I think
you totally can. You absolutely can. Freddie's just been better lately, but Freddie can become terrible very quickly.
100%. He hasn't had the bad starts the way that Burns has. Burns at his best is, looks like Freddie at his best. We just haven't seen bad Freddie for a while, which, knock on wood, that's the defining factor for us. Is that's what gives us, this edge in terms of starting pitching. A lot of teams have a couple good starters. It's having a third guy that really divides us from the pack.
We have breaking news.
Interesting.
Dun, dun, dun.
Breaking news. Blake Perkins reinstated from the 10-day IL. Joey sent down to AAA.
Oh,
interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's been coming on Weimer because he really just has struggled, and lately too, he's mostly been a platoon bat, and so he's just been playing against lefties, and he had 6 strikeouts in 2 starts against lefty starters this week against the Marlins. So he has struggled at the thing that he's good at with the bat, which is hitting lefties. So that probably does indicate that it was time to do that. Blake Perkins is every bit the defender that Joey Weimer is.
Yeah, that's the thing. I know Weimer's a little flashier, but Perkins is absolutely as good, if not better, than Weimer as a defender.
Yeah, the difference is I don't think he has the rocket for an arm, but he makes up for that with outstanding jumps and range and all of that. So Perkins is good from that perspective, and a switchy, right? So gives you that element as well. There's a little more flexibility there in terms of matchups. If I'm remembering this right, Blake Perkins is a switch.
I thought he batted lefty. But
lefty?
Either way,
I'm trying to look it up right now, but
with Yelich out,
correct.
Yeah. So with Yelich out, they kind of needed it somebody else who's at least capable of batting that way. So yeah.
Sorry, I'm so slow to this. I accidentally clicked on Glenn Perkins like I always do.
Oh no.
Ryan is right. He is a switch hitter.
Oh, he's a switch hitter. Yeah. Okay.
I think he might be better from that left side though. That might be what you're thinking. In terms of matchups, that's the way they would want to play him, which that is all fine. That works out just great.
All right. Well, after we got sidetracked by that breaking urgent Blake Perkins news, we do have one more Corbin Burns question from Patreon. Comes from PJ Wessels asking, Burns started the Saturday game and has 2 starts left based on games remaining. Which 2 games do you want him to start? And which 2 games should he start so that he can shoulder the most blame for the team not performing well? Sub question, is the Brewers' top 3 starting pitchers the best in the NL playoffs? So, Paul, we kind of touched on this a little bit. Do you think the Brewers' top 3 best 3 in the NL right now?
Oh, I don't know, only because I don't know off the top of my head a lot of other contenders like third pitcher.
Sure.
So quite possibly, yes. They've been really, really good. And even Burns struggling is still going to be better than most teams' threes. Woodruff's been great. Freddie's been unbelievably great. He's slowly climbed his way into like one of the highest strikeout totals in the National League. So I think yes. I'm trying to look up things right now, but they're pretty outstanding. So yeah, I think they are. And Burns, it doesn't matter where you start him. That's fine. Just throw him against the Cubs once, just for kicks. That's all I want.
Yeah, well, they're already kind of setting him up to go not against the Cubs because they want to save him for that 3-game series.
Yep, I want the first game against the Cubs for him. I want him to get right against a good team before the playoffs start, but they won't do that.
Yeah, I think it's already pretty much scheduled that he's going to go. Yeah, in the previous series. Against the Cardinals.
The Cardinals is going to be.
I think those guys are all pitching against the Cardinals. I think
he's going to pitch against the Cardinals and the Cardinals by the looks of it. Actually,
sure,
pretty sure that's right.
Yeah, right? And it's going to be the Cardinals. And actually, the Cardinals aren't a bad lineup. So the problem with the Cardinals is really pitching. So if you want them to face like a playoff caliber lineup, that's fine. Like that's the Cardinals. It's a playoff caliber lineup for sure. They just don't have any pitching. The Dodgers would be interesting here, but between
they're a mess,
right? They're just
so
a total mess with injuries and Julio Urias's nonsense
issues.
Like all of that. Like this, the Dodgers are a tough one. Looking at the Braves, though,
maybe the Braves,
it's better than I thought. Though, like
Strider, Elder, Morton, Max Reed,
Strider gets you far, and then
Strider has a 3.73 ERA this year. It's interesting.
Yeah,
but it's all bad luck if you look at all the Cy Young.
He's
still amazing. Everybody should go read the Cy Young article that was written this week, which I forgot who wrote it.
I think it was Mike Petrello.
I think it was Mike Petrello.
Yeah. But I mean, the Braves are good at just up and down the roster. Like it's the most complete team in baseball. And actually, this brings up a good point. So the Braves are the most complete team in baseball. They are the favorites by Fangraphs to win the World Series. And you know what that gets you in 2023? Last I looked, they were at 29% to win the World Series. So not even 1 in 3 chance to win the World Series. And they are, I think they're 29. I think the next closest team was in the mid-teens. So they were like double the odds of the next best team. And it still doesn't get you to a third to win the World Series, which really tells you about like what baseball is and why it's, different and harder to win in the postseason for the best teams. It doesn't tend to work out that way the way it does in other sports.
Yeah. Also, I think if the question is best 4, it's the Braves easily.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of the issue there, though, is
in a 7-game. Yeah.
Picking any 3 of them, I think you can make a case the Brewers are better. So
yeah, and like I'm looking at Bryce Elder here, and yes, Bryce Elder has a 3.50 ERA in 167
his peripherals
innings.
Aren't as good.
Right. Yeah, and we're talking about a 6.8 strikeouts per 9. And yes,
that's Wade Miley.
Yeah, the problem is if you're gonna do that exercise, then you run into Strider. You run into issues with the other ones. On like you want to count the peripherals or do you want to count the actual performance?
Right.
And if you do that, then it's actually complicated to put 3 together that are better. So
yeah. No, it's interesting. What is Max Fried's situation as far as health?
I don't know.
He's currently on the roster and pitching, so I'm gonna check his game logs here and see what he's up to, because he has the best ERA of anybody on that staff by a hefty margin, but he's also only pitched 71 innings.
Right.
No, I mean he's made all his starts since August 4th, and he has in that time 2.96 ERA, so looking pretty good. Like that probably does for me. Probably they can go toe to toe with the Brewers.
Yeah, they can.
Put it that way. Like they definitely can go toe to toe with the Brewers. Though the Brewers starting pitching, even with Burns, occasional hiccups here in the second half, he still has really strong numbers in the second half as well. Like because when he's been good, he's been utterly dominant, and he just like completely shuts a team down like he did the Yankees. So, like the bad outings are pretty mediocre for him, not truly terrible, and the good outings are amazing. So that still ends up working out to being, a pretty good starter.
All right. Moving on, because we still got a bunch of questions to get to. Brian Polakowski asking, with a likely 3 seed for the Crew, who do you expect to see as the 6? Who would you most like to see at the 6? So we kind of talked about the mess, Paul. Do you want to face the Cubs in a 3-game series? I mean, we already talked about why, from a fan perspective, no, but they're really scuffling. I guess take your pick. Which team?
My answer remains unchanged. I don't want to face them. Just even though they are kind of good, I don't want fans up here. My answer remains I would like the Phillies. However, now we got the end of the playoffs becoming much more just weird, and we have more candidates. So like if the Reds would sneak in, that would be lovely. They're not good. And the Marlins, if they would sneak in, that would be lovely. I guess that's the best case scenario because the Marlins aren't actually very good. But yeah, I don't want the Cubs. Any of those other teams, I would prefer to the Cubs.
Yeah, and that's mostly because I just don't want to share the stadium with them.
Same.
Yeah, like I'm going to be at some of those games, and I'd just like to not deal with that.
Yeah, it's not fun. So let's not do that.
Yeah, I think
that rant. Yeah.
Yeah, Miami is an interesting one here, though the Brewers still have 3 games left in Miami to play. So it's sort of, we almost run at counter purposes here. If you'd like Miami
Good call.
to play, you need to lose to them. And I don't want to lose to them. I just want to keep rolling here and keep it going. So that's sort of an interesting one from that perspective, because I don't believe we play any of the rest of these teams that are in contention here. I think it's all other than the Cubs until the final series of the year. I think that's.
I don't really want to play the Diamondbacks either.
No,
not like
they
that.
seem like they're getting hot.
Yeah,
that's a little scary. All right, Price Trozen asking, I just wanted to know your thoughts on the improved defense at first from Carlos Santana. He seems to be able to get everything in his range and looks great at digging bad throws. Subtopic, I advise against reading the comments under Kurt's tweets when the Brewers fall behind. I told one naysayer to take a walk and go do some drugs. Hashtag PCB comment section forever.
Yeah, there's a level of toxicity out there during games that just is befuddling sometimes with a team that is, this has been going pretty good, and it's been going pretty good for a while. I mentioned
it's supposed to be fun, guys. Yeah.
Right. I think when I did this on Thursday, the Brewers were 40 so they got swept by the A's, and then they were they went to Minnesota. I was at those games, and they got beat in both of those games. The first one was the Devin Williams meltdown, and the second one was just a crappy game. And they had lost 6 in a row, and that was June 14th. And at that point, they were 35-35, or 34-34. Sorry. And since that point, they're 50-30, and they've outscored their opponents by now 80 some runs. Okay, so over the last 3 months of this team, they are one of the best teams in baseball. They just were, over the first 2 months, 2+ months, they were just a 500 team. And this is pretty standard. This is kind of how it works. Most teams have a hot run during their season, and then they have a time period where they're just more average. And it seems like it's stacking up here for the right part of the season. So, yeah, I think that the level of angst about this is often just completely not in line, but that's been the true for a long time. But yeah, Santana does look good at first. I think he is still a good defender over there, and has helped the rest of the defense be even better than they already were, which was really, really good. So when you have all of that working together, it is really nice to have yes, first base is less important defensively, but it's also the guy who touches the ball more than anybody else on the team except for the catcher. So it is good to have somebody who at least knows how to pick it and can handle his way around the baseball and make sure that it ends up in his glove. That's important. So yeah, it definitely, it has been noticeable, and it's been helpful.
Yeah, over a season, you probably pick up a win with Santana, mostly because Tellez is also pretty bad at it, and so you're getting not over average, but over replacement level first base play. And Santana is good. His reputation as a defender over there is very good. So yeah, he is a professional first baseman, unlike Rowdy, who is a big guy who stands there and does his best. So that's what all you can hope for.
Devin Bearwolf, our next question, asking, it feels like Willie Adames has rebuilt a lot of his value from his bad start. Do you think he's more than likely now to be traded or tried to be signed to an extension? So I think the last time we kind of touched on this, we were kind of debating whether it was just BABIP luck or if he was stinging the ball a little bit more. And yes, I'm buying time for you guys to pull up his numbers so you can check that. But I guess, Paul, how do you feel about Willie lately? He has seemingly, gotten more of those hits to fall, especially driving in runs. So, I mean, it's better to see that than the alternative.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. He has been pretty good lately. Huh. I don't know why he hasn't stuck in my head as much. I I don't think that a 15 game surge over. I mean, it's nice timing. It's nice if he gets hot right for the playoffs, but unless there's some underlying change, which is really hard to see in Savant from what I'm looking at right now. Still skeptical of his ability to sustain this unless he does it for quite a while going forward. It's better than nothing. One of the weird things about it that might be actually positive here is he's been quite bad every month of the season in September, October so far, which they do both of them together. His power numbers and his OBP are both way up, obviously, but his batting average is still down.
Yeah.
So I don't think BABIP luck is responsible here, which is good, I guess. So maybe that's something. But show me more than just 15 games. But yeah, that could be worse. That's not bad.
Yeah, in August he had a 295 BABIP. In September it's down to 229, and this is his best month of the season. So he's having his best month with his the low. Well, no, he's had some really bad BABIPs this year. Like that May was really, really dreadful. But Paul, you hit it on the head. There's two things here that are driving him to be better, and that is the power. And the fact that he's hitting for some power, I think, has pitchers a little more scared to come into the zone on him.
Yep.
And he is now like efficiently working walks in a way that he hasn't since April. He had a 239 batting average in August, but a 320 on base. And in September, the batting average has fallen down to 212, but his on base is up to 344. So he is taking a significant number of walks. And I think mostly what I read into this is just Willie Adames is an extremely hot and cold running player. And it's hard to know exactly when you're going to get hot Willie and when you're going to get cold Willie. I think that we did see some, it's weird because most of that May would have been before he took that ball to the head, right? He took that at the very end of the month.
I think that's right.
Yeah, it was, I think it was Memorial Day weekend or thereabouts that happened. So it was fairly early in that month, and then he missed some time right after that. So, anyways, yeah, I think that it's hard to know because he's such a hot and cold running player in general.
Real quick, traded or extended or just ride it out with him?
In order for me, I would say the most likely thing is that they just ride it out.
Agreed.
Then I would say extension. Then I would say traded this winter. Also
agreed with that. I think that's what they do. They're probably going to ride it out and see what they got a little bit more and, get the most out of him. But it's hard to do anything else because it is so unsure of what you actually have here.
Sure. Tim Brown, our next question, asking, why do I hear so much bad about Josh Donaldson? What did I miss in his past that some of you don't like him? And I see so much about him being a bad locker room guy. Ryan, you kind of touched on this when they added him, but just the Cliff Notes version of the last few years of his history.
So he had a reputation as being a prickly locker room presence for a while. I heard about that when we were discussing whether or not the Brewers should sign him during his last free agency after he became a free agent, which would have been like 3-4 years ago. I remember there being discussion about, he's not the most beloved guy in the clubhouse and those sorts of things. But what mostly this is about is last year, the incident became public and everybody knew about it, was Josh Donaldson saw fit to taunt Tim Anderson, who is an African-American player, by calling him Jackie. And he had been doing it for a few years, going back to 2019. I'm looking at the article right here from Jesse Rogers and ESPN. He called him Jackie because Tim Anderson had talked about the fact that, like, as a African-American ball player in the modern era, there's things that it's difficult because there aren't that many. And so like he sort of compared himself to having to be like Jackie Robinson in his own way, because it's just not as common to have African-American players in the league now. And Donaldson thought that this was a suitable topic to taunt him about. He was told to stop it. He said, you don't need to talk to me anymore. And Donaldson persisted until last year it finally blew up into an actual benches clearing, not brawl, but heated argument on the field. And Josh Donaldson took a suspension for it. And that was basically the big public thing that we sort of got to know, so that's what Josh Donaldson's character is. And I said from the moment that they signed him that I hoped he didn't end up on the team. And I still cringe every time he comes to the plate. And it just is unsettling and kind of disgusting to me.
It'll be a short-term thing. I don't know if you need to worry about it too much longer,
but it's gross. I don't want to have guys like that on my team, because then it's you get into you're rooting for them to have success because you want them to do well because they're on your team. And I don't want to root for that guy to have success because, he showed his whole ass. I don't need to root for that guy.
Mark Podscarby, our next question, asking, at this point, what does the bullpen pecking order look like? So, I think, Ryan, you were the one that mentioned maybe Abner Uribe is sort of edging ahead of Joel Payamps at this point. Is that kind of your feeling?
I think that's a little bit unsettled. I think the reason that we saw that is they're trying to give Payamps more time off. They're trying to rest the bullpen guys and really, especially
Payamps
because
looks gassed for sure.
Payamps does look somewhat gassed. I think there's also just they're trying to give those guys rest because with the emergence of Uribe and Trevor McGill, they have guys that you can turn to legitimately in leverage situations way more than they did, a while back. And they also seem to be more comfortable with Bryce Wilson in those sorts of situations. So they have lots of potential choices here that they can go with. There's lots of different things that they can do. So I think that really it's Devin Williams and then a whole bunch of people. And there's a lot of guys that you could potentially turn to depending on the matchup, depending on what the situation is. Uribe still, I think, he clearly has the best stuff of anybody in the group. Devin Williams, airbender aside, which is sort of a sui generis one-off sort of pitch thing. But Abner Uribe's stuff is better than any other, and his performance is absolutely incredible. His batting average against, last I looked, was in the low 100s. So he is really, really incredible there. But I think that it's mostly just going to be mixing and matching. And I still feel pretty good about Payamps. Just make sure they're giving him rest and he's not pitching that much, and that hopefully gets him back on track because his stuff also took a huge step up this year.
It did. I suspect if they can get him rested and fix any lingering dead arm exhaustion problems with him, that he'll slide back into kind of the setup person role. But that does assume that happens. And if it doesn't really matter because they can just play matchups, rest and health behind Williams, and that's what they'll do. But I suspect they'd like him in that spot if they could get him sort of rested and right for the playoffs. But other than that, everybody's pretty good. Everybody throws 100. I mean, it's just going out there with everybody who is, on the most rest and working off of that.
Good problem to have.
It
for
is.
Sure. All right. Last question this week comes from Jay Google asking, is Garrett Mitchell going to get back in time? If he does, is it just defense and running, or will he see ABs? So that was the other bit of news in the last week on a rehab assignment down to Nashville. Ryan, I guess, where do you see him slotting in, if at all, down the stretch for the big league club?
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that he would be getting many at-bats, but I don't think that also needs to be a thing. I think he would sort of fit ideally if you call him up right before the playoffs and see, can he run and can he play defense? We looked this up last time. It was his left shoulder that had the issue, and he throws with his right. So defensively, he should be good. And the fact that it was a shoulder injury means he should be in perfect shape. There's no issues with that. You don't worry about him having lost some speed or whatever. He should be really fast, and he should still be a really good defender with a good arm. So I think those are the things that would mostly get him playing time in the postseason. I
Yep.
don't think we're talking about him much as a bat here. And I looked his first his first go through in AAA. He struck out 3 out of 4 at bats in his first night there, and now I'm pulling it back up.
A little rusty.
Yeah,
I would imagine,
right,
Yeah.
which you would imagine, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's fine. He's coming in, to guys who've been doing this for quite a while, and he's just trying to get caught up to speed. But yeah, and I had questions about the bat before, like that I still wasn't settled that, he's now like clearly a big league bat. I still see a lot of Brett Phillips in the guy, but that's going to be more of a long-term thing. Short-term, yeah, it's even harder to imagine that he would be hugely productive.
Still definitely valuable, though. Worth probably a postseason roster spot just as a pinch hitter and defensive replacement.
Yeah.
Take him over Weimer or Perkins, right, Paul?
There's a puncher's chance that he could even get hot with the bat. Like Ryan is right. It's hard to not play baseball for an extended period of time and keep your timing and you're hitting down. And if he had another month or whatever to do some legit rehab and get back to where he was, maybe you got something and maybe you luck into that. But I don't think there's enough time. So I'm kind of with you. Defense and running, totally worth it. Maybe you catch lightning in a bottle, but this is, probably what you get. And that's a useful guy to have on your team. Yeah.
And I mean, the other thing here is that he is one of the fastest players in big league baseball.
Yes,
he is just straight up really, really fast. So as a pinch runner, the Terrence Gore role, which I don't know if you guys caught on Effectively Wild, they were talking about this will be the first year that Terrence Gore didn't catch on with the team.
Oh,
yeah.
bummer.
Yeah, so the Terrence Gore thing. So yeah, so he could be in that sort of a situation, but his sprint speed, 93rd percentile. It's not, I thought it was even a little bit better than that, but yeah, 93rd percentile, obviously still very, very good. He is one of the faster players out there, and that would be his role because he's an exceptional defender and exceptionally fast.
Yeah, if you're in a spot in the playoffs where you need a stolen base, he'd be a good bet to pinch run there for sure. All right, that'll do it for Patreon questions this week. Thanks to everybody who sent one in. Reminder, patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month gets you question priority. Make sure that we answer or talk about your question here every week. When you sign up, you also get a shout out as a new patron. We got a few to name here this week. Ryan, who do we have?
We have Scott and Brian L. and John Powers, who all signed up in the last week. So thank you to all of you guys who did that.
Welcome aboard, guys.
Yeah, I'm assuming this might have something to do with the Packers winning last week and wanting to get in the questions. We'll have to see. Did any of them ask questions? I don't think they asked questions for this. So keep an eye out and see if those guys show up on the REE podcast, because that's probably why they did it.
Probably so. See you guys on the other side.
All three also at the $5 level, so they get the extra perk of the
bonus
Packers
content.
mini pod and minor league extra. So a reminder to go sign up there. Thank you everybody for the questions this week. Plenty to talk about, and we'll have even more to talk about next week, whether it's the stadium deal or the Brewers getting closer to clinching a division. We will be back next week to talk about all of that stuff. In the meantime, fingers crossed the Brewers can finish off a sweep of the Nats and the Cubs keep losing. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.